looking, reaches, that ball's out, that's live! Back the other way, Sam Hubbard! The Cincinnati Kid! Hubbard's got a convoy! Chased by Andrews! At the 30, the 20, he will score!
To the end zone, down the field, and it is deflected, and gone! Touchdown! A.J. Green!
Over goes back to throw, men are coming late, looks right down the middle, there's Eddie Brown, he has it at the 35 to the 30, he may go, 10-5, touchdown!
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up.
Yeah.
It is good.
Corey Dillon, he's gone. The knockout punch, you're looking at it. 65 yards. And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20, touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Trent Johnson's got it. Touchdown, Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go! Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found! Chase for the touchdown! Wow, Chase is on the case!
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam! How about that?
Welcome in to a New Year's Eve edition of Chatterbox Bengals. Last time we'll talk to you in 2024, and it's previewing a pseudo playoff game. Who thought we'd get here earlier this year? We've got a winning in per se, at least on Saturday night. It's winning in, and then we see what happens Sunday. But about as exciting as you can hope for when this season started the way it did. Craig, good to see you. Sorry I missed you over the weekend, but Elliot held it down, did a phenomenal job.
Elliot held it down. I hope you had a good trip to New York. Welcome back. Look, while you were gone, though, I know the first time you missed a game, the Bengals won.
That's right.
Second time, we weren't so lucky. This time, though, the Bengals win. Plus, they got some help this weekend.
That's true. From
the Indianapolis Colts. So I'm not going to send you away this weekend. I need your hype for this Pittsburgh game on Saturday night now. For those of you that haven't seen Saturday at 8 p.m. But look, I'm excited. Like you said, essentially a playoff game. If you don't win, you have zero chance at the playoffs. Still need some help if you do win, but you're in a lone primetime spot on national television. It feels certainly as much like a playoff game as you can possibly ask for at this point. Certainly wouldn't love the fact that we're in the situation where we need it, but we are in the situation nonetheless, so let's take advantage of it and have some fun.
And we'll get into what all that'll take and the whole playoff picture and everything like that. But before we do, as always, we'll start with some key plays of the day. And the first one I have isn't one I had in here originally, but on the other Chatterbox programming this morning on Off the Bench, we discussed it a little bit. It was Reed Mouse's favorite play of the day, the speed option, Joe Burrow to Khalil Herbert. With the season on the line, wouldn't you think the Bengals run a speed option to Khalil Herbert? And it's not even executed well, but Herbert able to needle his way through there and pick up a first down. Ted Karras unable to get out there and get his block. Really no help there on the exterior whatsoever. And Khalil Herbert somehow makes it happen. Glad he did, because if not, this play call would have been talked about a lot today and probably for the next couple weeks.
Jacob, when you watch this, explain to me Ted Karras' role. He's not even pulling. He gets to the second level and then runs out to try and block because his second level block assignment got free to the outside. Again, like you said, it ended up working because Khalil Herbert made a nice cutback and Ted Karras happened to be there to pick up the back end block. But in reality, that play had no business working. And
right.
I'm not really sure what the thought process was there. You have a backup running back who you haven't trusted to even see the field during the entire game. Chase Brown had been on the field the entire game, with the exception of the plays after his injury. And going to that play in a key moment was certainly interesting. And for me, the biggest question mark was the blocking scheme. And that's been a big question for a lot of plays all season long. Not to start with negativity. I got blown up on Twitter a little bit for the negativity after the game on Saturday. Here we are starting another show with some negativity. I don't necessarily understand the blocking scheme. There's been a number of plays this year where the blocking scheme just doesn't seem to really make sense for what they're trying to accomplish. And this is just another one of those examples. Let's say that Karras got to that second level and he held his block on the linebacker there. That still leaves an unblocked defender on the edge that basically would have been one-on-one with Khalil Herbert. And maybe you just trust Khalil Herbert enough to make that play. Maybe you don't, but it ended up working out. They picked up the first down, and there were a lot of other exciting plays that happened during this game that we're going to break down as well. This one, a little bit of a head scratcher. I know you talked about it this morning on Off the Bench, and there were some conflicting opinions on it, but I don't love the blocking scheme on it. I don't mind the idea of a run. Maybe there was zero option in it, to be honest. Like maybe it was just a designed, we're going to get you outside and that's how we're going to run it. But the blocking scheme didn't make a ton of sense. Cody Ford didn't get free to pull if that was his intention. Ted Karras getting to the second level before he had to then follow his man to the outside didn't make a ton of sense, but it worked out, I should say. I don't know if it worked per se, but it worked out.
My hang up is exactly what you said there. Even in the perfect scheme, at least from what we saw, you're leaving one guy unblocked on the edge with Khalil Herbert. And if you do trust him to make that play, why is that his like fifth carry on the Bengals? If you think he can make an edge play one-on-one in the open field with your season on the line, we should have had a little bit more of a split backfield for the last 6 or 7 weeks. I don't understand that one at all, if that is the design. If not, and Cody Ford just got all swallowed up, then I guess I have even bigger questions about why you're calling that play and asking those guys to do that in that point. But regardless, one guy that did do his job much better this week than he had in weeks past is Orlando Brown. Obviously, an injury had kept him out for a while, but in the time we saw him, the game in between his two stints out, we had a couple plays in here in this segment that week of just not looking like himself, which is so frustrating with the other pieces we have on this line already. Mims coming along well as a rookie, but we know how bad the two guards are, and Ted Karras' struggles of himself, and with Orlando Brown out there, it's a completely different unit, and to see him as a shell of himself was really a kick to the gut as we knew what this team was going to have to do. But now coming down towards the end of the season, Orlando Brown's looking like Orlando Brown. There's Nick Bonito coming off the edge, one of the Defensive Player of the Year candidates, and not a full rush there, but Orlando gets on him and then gets out to the blitzing corner and gives Joe enough time to get that ball off to Jamar Chase, convert the third down, pick up the first, keep the drive alive. Really a great thing to see there. A good play from a guy that we've expected to make those kinds of plays during his time in Cincinnati, and seeming like even if he's not healthy, I mean, we heard him after the game say he's playing on a broken leg, but he's at least doing enough to make a difference. And then we have a guy who is supposedly healthy, 65, Alex Kappa there on the right, ended up on his butt like he usually does.
We talked about it a lot during Orlando Brown Jr.'s absence, in the fact that you don't have to make a perfect block on every play, but you have to affect the route of the rusher enough to where you're giving your quarterback enough time to do what he needs to do. And obviously this is an intended quick pass, and Orlando Brown knew that, right? So he has his initial block, he passes that off to the inside, and then makes enough of a touch, I guess, on 29 there as he's rushing off the edge. Yeah. There were a number of plays that we showed over the last several weeks where that edge rusher was coming in and the offensive lineman didn't even get his hand on that rusher in order to affect his path. So, as minimal as that may seem, when you're talking about a guy who, again, completely disrupted the initial rush and then was able to get enough of a hand on that second rusher to be able to disrupt his path, it makes all the difference in the world. If 29's coming in off the edge uninterrupted, he's getting to Burrow as he's throwing that ball at the very latest and affecting that play a little bit. So for him to be able to get the hand on the rusher, as minimal as it may seem, had a big effect on the outcome of that play and the ability for Joe Burrow to complete the pass.
No question about it. And Joe's been so great in those less than ideal situations that when Orlando comes in and just gives him a split second more than he's used to, of course he's going to get that ball off. And I think a little bit of that comfort is what we saw in such a spectacular game on Saturday night. I know the offensive line still wasn't great. Amarius Mims obviously came out partially through that game and was replaced by Devin Cochran, but having Orlando Brown back on your blind side has to give Joe Burrow a little bit more of a sense of security. And when he's delivering the ball like he was on Saturday, I don't know how people can't act like that's a huge, huge deal. And I know this O-line unit is not where we need it to be, and guard is a massive need, but it's much better than what we saw for that 4 or 5 week stretch when Orlando Brown wasn't out there. He elevates everyone around him on that entire offensive line. He makes Joe Burrow more comfortable back there. He makes the running back's job easier by eliminating the edge rusher on the left side. Really just such an important part to this team, and with maybe just one game left in the season when we know we have to win, it's great to see him coming back into form even just a little bit against one of the best defenses in the NFL. And I think that's something that's important to talk about with this matchup as well. This Broncos defense was one of the best defenses in the NFL coming into this matchup. Top to bottom, really every single unit on that side of the ball for them, one of the best in the league. And the Bengals were able to take advantage more often than not. And the matchup the Bengals attacked all day long was T. Higgins on Riley Moss. And you saw it in back-to-back plays in overtime that ultimately won the Bengals the game. The first play, a deep shot down the sideline, one-on-one coverage at the top of your screen. Riley Moss, T. Higgins, the story of the day. And it was perfectly encapsulated with the last 2 plays of the game. A deep ball right there, and then right back to the one-on-one coverage. Vance Joseph didn't learn his lesson. T. Higgins made him pay. 2 great plays, a great connection that I can't bear to watch leave Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, phenomenal pass by Joe Burrow, putting it in a position where only T. Higgins could catch that ball, not only on the deep bomb, but also that touchdown pass. T. Higgins had it working all day long. We talked about it on the postgame show, but 11 catches for 131 yards and 3 touchdowns. Obviously, the hope is that this wasn't T. Higgins' last game in the jungle, but if it was, he certainly went out on top, showcasing the connection that he and Joe Burrow had all game long. And you mentioned it, Riley Moss was clearly a target that this Bengals team felt like they could target. There were some pundits before the game that felt like if Riley Moss played, that he was going to be the difference maker. Ultimately, the Bengals clearly didn't agree with that. They end up targeting him 15 times on the game, Jacob, completing 11 of them for 128 yards, and 2 of those touchdowns went against Riley Moss, including that one in overtime as the game winner. Riley Moss, I thought it was funny after the game. I won't say the exact language, but basically said, sometimes you have games like this and you just eat poo. And Riley Moss certainly played like poo on Saturday, because the Bengals took advantage of him early and often. And for a guy who, quite frankly, came into this year not necessarily, came into this matchup not necessarily as something that was identified as a weakness by a lot of people, for the Bengals to identify that and to go after it all game long was certainly a sight to be seen. And T. Higgins showed 2 of them there, but 7 catches on 8 targets, 101 yards, and both touchdowns. So huge game for T. Higgins and for Joe. And again, certainly hope that this isn't T. Higgins' last game in the jungle, but if it is, he certainly went out on top.
They asked Jamar Chase about that today. If it was T. Higgins' last game in the jungle, how did it feel for him to have a big one? And Jamar Chase said, that's a big if. It's a big if. And all these comments coming together, T. Higgins saying the other day that it's not imperative to him, it's not the most important thing to him to have wide receiver 1 money, and highlighting the fact that he plays with the best quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and one of the best wide receivers in the league, and how important that is to him as well. All these breadcrumbs lining up, and the agent switch just a few weeks ago, it really feels like the stars might be aligning for T. Higgins to remain in Cincinnati. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want to get too excited. We still have a game to win on Saturday night and a playoff push to hopefully be excited for this season before we have to worry about the free agency aspect of things. But I sure hope that wasn't T. Higgins' last game in Cincinnati, because he showed how much he meant to this offense. And Joe Burrow said time and time again that he's a need. And on Saturday night, in a must-win game to keep your season alive, I'm not sure he could have looked like more of a need. He was as dominant as they come against a corner, like Craig just said, and Riley Moss, that many people thought was going to be the difference in the game if he played. Certainly far from a scrub in terms of a cornerback too, and T. Higgins dominated all game long. It was a connection that was there from the opening whistle to the end, and that touchdown sealed it. And if that was the way you go out, 102 touchdowns, what a season it's been. His best statistical season of his career. He's already over his career touchdowns mark. He won't quite get to his yards mark because of the games played, but all per game stats, he's well over his career marks. He's tied for wide receiver number 2 in fantasy football in terms of points per game, tied with Justin Jefferson. Obviously, the injuries changed that stat a little bit, but such a dominant season for T. Higgins when he's been out there. And I know that's a worry for a lot of Bengals fans, as that price might keep creeping up, but a lot of things going our way, if you will, in the early ends of these negotiations.
You mentioned that Joe Burrow called T. Higgins a need, and T. Higgins told Aditi Kinkabwala, I believe is her name. I apologize. But Aditi, the sideline reporter for CBS, T. Higgins told her, quote, "I'm playing with, if not the best, one of the best quarterbacks. I'm playing with, if not the best, one of the best wide receivers. And that opens up a lot of things for me. In this offense, everyone has a chance to be spotlighted." And Jamar Chase went on to tell CBS that T is one of the most unselfish people in this locker room, and certainly seems like all the stars are aligning, as you mentioned, and just the timing of a lot of the things that happened this season with T. Higgins, with some of the comments made by Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase lining up with the move away from David Mulligetta. Certainly all seem to be lining up with the idea of them having a plan in place. Now we just got to wait till February or March to find out what that plan really is.
Right, and it could be a brutal couple months if the chips don't fall our way on Saturday and Sunday, because that's a lot of extra time to be worrying about the future of this organization and this team. But before we move on and talk about the rest of that, we do have to talk about two other plays that happened on Saturday. I know the Bengals were able to escape with a win, but there's a guy by the name of Marvin Mims who also had a hell of a day on Saturday night. 2 touchdowns. This one, the second longest air yardage completion in StatCast history, NFL Next Gen Stats history. Second longest completion to Marvin Mims there by Bo Nix. Unbelievable deep ball. And Jordan Battle just gets absolutely cooked. You can see it better from the other angle here. Jordan Battle right there at the hash, runs towards the 30, gets completely turned around. Geno Stone unable to recover. Just a completely blown coverage there by both of the safeties, unable to stick with a guy who, look, Marvin Mims is all right, but he shouldn't be beating you like that, Craig.
No, and we saw Marvin Mims win a couple of matchups in this game, and that's certainly unfortunate for a guy who didn't exactly jump off of paper as a guy who you need to worry about a whole lot. But you said it best. I mean, Jordan Battle just gets completely turned around. I think he's expecting 2 corner routes out of those 2 receivers there. Doesn't get the corner route, instead gets the go route to the post. And you mentioned it, the second longest air yards pass in StatCast history. Who would have guessed it? Bo Nix and PJ Walker at the top of that list at 67 plus yards in the air. Again, Jordan Battle gets turned around. Geno Stone not quick enough to make up the ground on that pass. Unfortunate, and not the only time that this Bengals defense got beat deep, but
no.
We'll take a look at that other one now.
Yeah, this one was heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, if you will. Takes away Joe Burrow's first game-winning drive. He had 3 in this game. Took away Joe Burrow's first game-winning drive. Crazy play, touchdown, rollout, decent pressure by Cedric Johnson. Gets Bo Nix on the ground, actually, after the throw. And, again, Marvin Mims with a great play. Von Bell thought it was incomplete, and to be completely honest with you, at first, so did I. But great play by Marvin Mims to make the play, get the feet down, control the football, and really a better play by Bo Nix to, within all the mess of that play, give him a catchable ball inbounds with space to make that play. Really an all-around awesome play by the Broncos. It's a shame it came when it did, because that could have ended the Bengals season had the Broncos chose to go for 2 like a lot of people thought they were going to. Luckily, they did not. We went to overtime. Bengals got a little lucky and got the win, but what a play this was by Bo Nix and the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, incredible play. Obviously able to just enough time to avoid the Cedric Johnson rush there. Made the throw, jump ball, and it was one of those fluke plays that just kind of didn't go the Bengals' way. And Shocker. I don't know that they really played this. I know, right? I don't know that they really played this poorly. I mean, they had 2 guys there defending the ball. Mims didn't exactly catch it cleanly and was sliding as he went out of bounds. I thought, if they would have called that incomplete on the field, it would have stood as incomplete. They called it a completion on the field, so it stood as a completion afterwards. But yeah, the frustrating part is that and you mentioned it or kind of alluded to it, Joe Burrow ended up having to win this game 3 different times in order for them to actually walk away with a W. And the plays like that certainly are part of it. Bo Nix ends the game with 219 passing yards. You take away that one, which was a 25-yard Hail Mary, and you take away the 51-yard bomb to Mims, and he ends the game at basically 140 yards of total passing. For the most part, the Bengals played fairly well on defense. I know a lot of people probably don't want to hear it, but outside of those 2 really shot plays, they didn't give up a whole lot to this Broncos team, who came in with a decent enough offense. Certainly some question marks in the running game that have been there all year. That's not going to change anytime soon, but I thought that they did decently enough with Bo Nix. It just they got unlucky on that touchdown there, and certainly got turned around and had a poor performance on the deep bomb to Mims, but that's the way things go, unfortunately.
The Bengals defense finally, honestly, did what we've asked them to do all year on Saturday, and it's give the Bengals a chance to win the game. In one of these games, they finally gave the Bengals a chance. The offense screwed up in overtime, and they missed a field goal. And I think it's important to note, a perfect snap and perfect hold. Cade York missed the field goal, and the defense got a 3-and-out and got the ball back. They got the ball back for this offense, and they struggled in this game time and time again. In this offense, we just showed 2 terrible plays, but they got the ball back, and they gave Joe Burrow a chance, and he seized it, and he won the game. And that's what we've asked them to do all year. We've said time and time again, they don't have to be the best. They really just have to be what they've been over the last 5 weeks or so. And I know a lot of those stats are heavily weighted in a 3-game stretch against some of the NFL's worst quarterbacks, but we even saw a little bit of a higher level of play this week against the Broncos, who, like it or not, they are a playoff team. They are a 9-win team. So this unit, they're not good. Don't get it twisted. They're not good. But they're playing slightly better to a point where I think the Bengals have a chance against a team like the Broncos, against a team like the Steelers going to Pittsburgh. They're giving this team a chance, which is, if they played at this level earlier in this year, we're probably not talking about, odds in the plus 1,100 range and, 15-1 to make the playoffs. If you're looking at a parlay and everything like that, we're probably in. And we're probably talking about potentially resting starters in the 6 or 7 seed right now against Pittsburgh because we can't move. If this defense plays well, or this well, slightly below league average in a handful of other games where we're having a completely different conversation right now. And that's a painful part about these last couple weeks, but they picked a hell of a time to turn it on.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all the close games that this Bengals team have been in all year long, and if you would have gotten the defense that you've gotten out of them the last 4 or 5 weeks, we're probably talking about a completely different scenario right now in terms of the playoffs. You look back at games like the Kansas City Chiefs where, again, didn't give up a ton of points, but 26 points when the Bengals offense scores 25. You look at the Commanders game where Jaden Daniels just threw the ball up and down the field the entire time. They end up winning that game 38-33. That's a game that probably goes a different way if this Bengals defense plays the way they have. The Ravens' first game that went to overtime, 41-38. That's a game that goes a different way if you're really talking about this defense playing differently. Even games more recently, the second Ravens games, the Chargers game, even that Steelers game, potentially all have different outcomes if this defense is playing at just an average level like they have over the last 4 weeks. And again, like you said, I don't think they've been great by any means. I mean, they gave up 27 to the Titans. They gave up 24 to the Broncos, 20 to the Cowboys. But if you can hold, as crazy as it sounds, if you can hold offenses to 24 points, under 30 points in your games, you're giving Joe Burrow a chance.
Right.
And at the end of the day, what has happened is, at least from what we've heard, is that Lou Anarumo has simplified the defense, simplified the responsibilities, and that's resulted in the Bengals defense being able to play more loose, be able to play a little bit more reactionary. How many times in the first several weeks did we talk about guys who were out of position, and we had 2 guys in the same zone, or we had Cam Taylor-Britt who was abandoning his area because he thought that he was supposed to cover a guy that was crossing and completely vacated an area of the field because of it. So, this simplified defense has certainly seemed to work out okay for the Bengals. It'll be really interesting to see how it pans out against a decent offense with the Pittsburgh Steelers, even though they've been struggling. And then more importantly, if they can make the playoffs, what does it look like against a team like the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen?
Right, and I think that's the biggest question. And obviously we hope we're lucky enough to get that scenario, and we hope we get to find out. And we're only sitting here at this point with a little bit more optimism than maybe we should have, because we got some help on Saturday as well, or I guess on Sunday as well. And it was the Giants pulling a rabbit out of the hat and somehow getting a win, with Drew Lock putting up the 6th best quarterback game of all time. The Giants beating the Colts to keep the Bengals alive has me so optimistic going into this week, not just because of knocking one more thing off the list that the Bengals need, but that seems like about as far-fetched of an idea as possible. A 9-point dog New York Giants, a team that hasn't scored more than, I think 15 points all year long, puts up 45 and beats the Colts to give the Bengals a little bit of a chance. We have another 9-point dog this week that we need to win. And this time we're not betting on Drew Lock. We're betting on Carson Wentz. But as we look at all the things the Bengals need to have happen, the craziest one might have already happened Saturday, and it's the Bengals overcoming a Hail Mary and a missed field goal to beat the Broncos, coupled with a 9-point underdog New York Giants knocking the Colts out. Now we only need 2 more things to happen. After all the events of the weekend, Craig, are you feeling a little bit better? I know the odds aren't certainly in our favor, but some of the chips seem to be falling generally in our direction, as much as you can ask for at this point in the season with what we need to happen.
I said before the news about Tua and Anthony Richardson this week coming out that I felt like MetLife Stadium had an opportunity to provide us back-to-back defeats that were necessary. We got the first one with the Colts losing this past weekend to the Giants. Now we get potentially a Tua-less Dolphins going into MetLife Stadium to play the Jets. Obviously, or so it seems, Aaron Rodgers has no interest in finishing the season strong, even at one point allegedly telling his coach that, hey, maybe we should go with Tyrod. Doesn't lead me to have a whole lot of faith, Jacob.
Right.
But everything in my being right now is telling me the Bengals are going to get the job done on Saturday. I may even think that the Jets get the job done, and this Chiefs team is just going to stomp on our heart and just ruin it for us. And as much as I'd like to believe that Carson Wentz can relive the glory days of the Super Bowl run with the Eagles and all of those things,
MVP.
I find it really hard to believe that they're going to be able to beat the Broncos that we just saw. But the Broncos, they're playing for something, and this Chiefs team is not. And the Chiefs team is likely to sit starters. You talked about it this morning on Off the Bench, or Monday morning as well. Chris Jones not likely to play. Patrick Mahomes not going to play. Travis Kelce probably not going to play. I would imagine Joe Thuney not going to play. The list goes on and on of guys that this Kansas City Chiefs team likely will and should sit during this week. And it's going to open up a lot of opportunity in my eyes for this Denver pass rush, which we saw how good this Denver pass rush can be on Saturday. It's going to open up a lot of opportunity for them to put a ton of pressure on Carson Wentz. And if this Chiefs team is going to win, they need to be able to establish the run. I don't know if Isaiah Pacheco is going to play or if Kareem Hunt is going to go, but neither one of them have been overly successful over the last few weeks. Doesn't give me a lot of faith. I'd love for it to happen, Jacob, but my mentals right now are preparing for the worst.
I'm glad they scheduled it the way they did. Let me enjoy this game. Let me have fun with this Steelers game and enjoy it. Because if somehow they had put this after the Broncos or the Jets and we had already known our fate going into this game and my season gets cut an extra week short, haven't I been through enough? Haven't the Bengals fans been through enough? Let us have fun on Saturday night. Big time thank you to the NFL, even though I'm not too excited about getting a 5th road primetime game this year and another AFC North primetime game on the road after losing our home AFC North primetime game earlier this year against the Browns. So the Bengals kind of at fault of themselves. I mean, getting this game back to a point to where it can be in primetime is, I guess, a round of applause to them, but losing that home Browns one, no one's fault but their own. So I guess, just a product of the situation around you, but I am very happy that we're going to get this game in a standalone fashion before we know what else happens so we can all lock in and have as much fun as possible.
Yeah, the Bengals now the only team in NFL history with 5 road primetime games in a single season. I realize that, they've been flexed into primetime a couple times now, but That's a lot of road primetime games. The Steelers 8-2 in their last 10 home primetime games, 9-2 all time against the Bengals in home in primetime games. The last time the Bengals won in Pittsburgh in a primetime game, Jacob, 1995. It's a great time to break that streak. That, you know what that means? Time for us to break it. But I agree with you. How terrible would it be if this Bengals-Steelers game was amazing and it was so much fun and we're down to the wire, and then all of a sudden we see that the Chiefs beat the Jets or the Chiefs beat the Broncos, right, or whatever the Broncos beat the Chiefs.
Beat the Chiefs. Right.
We're going to get there eventually. Okay. I might go through 3 or 4 different scenarios. We're going to get there eventually. The Broncos beat the Chiefs or the Dolphins beat the Jets. How deflating that would be.
Right.
As we're watching an exciting game. So the fact that it's a standalone game and what will surely be an exciting shootout with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm excited for. A lot of fun. I asked some people in the chat on Off the Bench on Monday morning their thoughts on it, but if the Bengals win on Saturday night, I wouldn't be opposed to a Sunday afternoon watch along at Chatterbox Studios with you and maybe Reed and some of the guys that want to get together and
we can pull on
watch.
That one. I think that'd be a good time.
Watch the Sunday afternoon games.
They put those in the same window for a reason, right? They're setting it up well for us. We'll see what strings we can pull on that. It sounds like a pretty good idea. I think if everything keeps falling our way, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have everyone together to get into the playoffs and start that run, because don't let these boys in. I'll tell you that right now. Before we get to all the odds and a little bit more about what we need to happen this weekend, we talked about it yesterday on Off the Bench. Kind of a heated topic, and I guess I want to get your take before I kind of go through my rationale, because I have kind of thought about it a little bit more and understand both sides a little bit more than I did yesterday morning. But Craig, if you want to kick it off, obviously we're talking about the Bengals' last possession, or I should say second to last possession because of the kneel down of regulation. The Bengals get down to the Broncos, I want to say 1 yard line. Yeah, 1 yard line. And then immediately score a touchdown with over a minute on the clock. And then obviously, as we saw earlier during the Key Plays segment, the Marvin Mims Hail Mary at the end of the game over Mike Hilton and Geno Stone that resulted in a tie game, sent it to overtime. So just that whole scenario, Craig, kind of what you would have done, your thoughts on the situation, or if you think there's any other key pieces you think I left out, feel free.
Well, I want to take it back, right? So obviously a lot of people are focusing on the last 2 plays of that drive with Chase Brown sliding down at the goal line, and then the next play, Zach Taylor deciding to call a QB sneak to ultimately score the touchdown with time remaining. I want to go all the way back to the start of that drive, okay? So the Bengals get the ball with 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and at that point, it's a tie game, 17-17, okay? They start the drive with a pass down the middle to Jamar Chase. He picks up 38 yards, okay? Right. So now we get to the 2-minute warning. The Bengals have the ball 1st and 10 at the Denver 21-yard line. So you're already in field goal range. At that point, you're looking at a 38-yard field goal to win the game if you can eat clock. Instead, here's what happens over the next couple plays, okay? 1st and 10 at the Denver 21-yard line. The Bengals throw basically a screen pass to Chase Brown, who doesn't get down in bounds, gets pushed out of bounds to stop the clock with 1 minute and 55 seconds. So you're 1 play in under the 2-minute warning. You wait 5 seconds, and you're out of bounds after gaining 4 yards, okay? So that's the first issue. Chase Brown should have got down in bounds on that play. The next play, you're thinking, okay, whoa, we got to eat some clock here. Let's run the ball and try and pick up some more yardage, make it third and manageable. No, they throw again. I'm all on board with putting the ball in your best player's hands, but they throw again, passes incomplete, and here we are 2 plays after the 2-minute warning, and they've eaten a total of 9 seconds off the clock, okay? So now here you are. It's 3rd and 6 at the Denver 17-yard line, 1 minute 51 to go. You throw it, you pick up the first down with Jamar Chase. He picks up 11. You're down to the Denver 6, okay? Denver calls their second timeout, 1 minute 39 left in regulation. Okay, so let's first start with that first segment, okay? So you had the ball at the 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You're able to get it down to the 2-minute warning after your first play. And then you eat a total of 9 seconds off the play clock before Denver has to actually use a timeout. That's my first problem, okay? We talk about some of the decision-making that Zach Taylor has throughout the game, and we talk about some of the issues that some fans have with Zach Taylor. This is one of those scenarios that I struggled with, that I felt like, one, Chase Brown needed to get down in bounds, which Zach Taylor probably didn't do a good enough job of explaining the situation and making sure that Chase Brown knew what the expectation was if they were going to run that play. And then they didn't run the ball at all. So you've got 9 seconds eaten off the clock with those plays. Okay, so now we get into the scenario that everyone's talking about, which is secondary in my eyes to how we actually got there. Minute 39, 1st and goal at the Denver 6-yard line. You run the ball with Chase Brown. He picks up 5 yards. You're down to the 1. He slides down. And because of the injury that Chase Brown has, he ends up with essentially Cincinnati being charged their 3rd and final timeout of the game with 1:31. Okay. Right. So 1:31 on the clock, 2nd and goal at the 1-yard line. The decision making at this point is, okay, what they did is they ultimately run the QB sneak. They score 2 seconds later, 1:29 on the clock. Instead, what some people are arguing that should have happened, and I want to walk through exactly how this would have played out or could have played out, right? So 1:39 on the clock. Let's say Joe Burrow drops back, kneels down, you eat 2 or 3 seconds off the clock, and then Denver calls another timeout at 1:29, basically, right? So essentially the same amount of time as if they hadn't scored, 1:29. So now Denver's out of timeouts with 1:29 to go. You would have had the ball at that point, 3rd and goal at the 2 or 3 yard line.
Right.
Okay. So it's 1:29. You have a couple options at that point. Do you run a play to try and get closer? Do you just kneel it again? Either way, let's say you kneel it. 1:29, you kneel it. It would have been 3rd and goal. You run the clock down to about 45 seconds, I believe, is what it essentially would have gotten to in that scenario. So 1st and goal, you get it down to the 1. 2nd and goal, you would have kneeled it, taken it down to 49 seconds. And then you would have had the ball 3rd and 1 with 49 seconds left. And at that point, you can make the decision, do I want to score a touchdown or do I want to kneel it again and take it down even farther? At that point, if you kneel it down, you get the clock down to, at worst, 15 seconds. And then you have an opportunity to trot out your field goal team. Even if you take a delay a game to make sure that you eat as much clock as possible, so be it. But now that clock is down to essentially 15 seconds or less for the Denver Broncos to have to score a field goal in order to tie the game or need a touchdown to win it. And I realize that everyone wants to point to the fact, Denver went and scored a touchdown in 1:21. Well, that's a lot different. If I give you the ball on the 30-yard line with 1:20 and say you got to go score a touchdown, or I give you the ball on your own 30 with 15 seconds and no timeouts, you got to go score a touchdown. Those are two very different scenarios. And by the way, because they still had a timeout, it also opened up the entire playbook for the Denver Broncos to be able to do whatever they wanted in that situation. So that was the biggest thing for me, is that by forcing Denver to call their final timeout, you're essentially limiting their playbook to only plays along the sideline. So regardless of whether you agree with running the clock all the way down to 15 or just kneeling once and then trying to score on the 3rd down play, either one I'm okay with. But I think in that scenario, you have to have Denver burn their final timeout. You can't give them the ball back with an opportunity to score with a timeout in their pocket, because you have the entire playbook at your disposal at that point. And for a defense who struggled all year long, to put them in a position where you have to defend an entire playbook, that's a really tough position to be in. And I think that's the biggest challenge for me. I would have loved to have seen Denver have to use one more timeout before the Bengals gave the ball back to them. Didn't happen that way. Unfortunately, Denver gets the ball back with 1:20 left. They go down and they're able to score the touchdown again on that kind of fluky play.
Right.
But ultimately what it comes down to is, whether or not could Denver have moved the ball however far in 15 seconds without a timeout. And ultimately what happens is Denver uses 15 seconds on their first 2 plays and they get to the Cincinnati 48. So they would have been left with either a Hail Mary from the 48 or they would have been left with a 66-yard field goal attempt to tie it. And I like my chances a lot better going up against a Hail Mary from the 48 or a field goal try of 66 yards than I do giving them 1:21 to be able to move the ball. So that was my frustration with the whole scenario. Make Denver use their timeout. Whether you want to score after that or not, I don't have a problem with. But that next play, that second down play, needed to be a kneel in my eyes.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think you had a great point of pointing out first that second series, the first series after that Jamar Chase gain, where the Bengals really just didn't use the opportunity they had to kill a lot of clock there. Taking the ball from the 2-minute warning down to 151 on 2 plays, that's unacceptable. You have to hand at least one of those balls off, or if you are going to throw it, they have to be sure things. I mean, I know the list of sure things grows a little bit when your quarterback's Joe Burrow. You trust him to make a lot of plays, but in a situation like that, the clock has to run. And I know we have to put onus on players at some point for making plays, and obviously I'm willing to put a lot of that onus on Chase Brown for going out of bounds, but Craig, you're also absolutely right. I'm sure that's a coaching error. That should be preached all the time. Situational football, that goes on the coaches in every scenario, so I'm not going to let Zach Taylor get off scot-free here. But when you get down to the goal line there, sure. I think the kneel down instead of scoring right there on second down is an argument that's absolutely warranted. My thing ultimately is that I just would never pick field goal with the unit that we've seen so far this year. If you get down there, especially inside the 5-yard line, and you have a chance to score a touchdown, I know 121 and a timeout, there's a risk there, and especially with our defense, there is. But it still took an unbelievable play to Marvin Mims to send that game to overtime. And I probably do have a different tone if we don't end up winning it in overtime. But I do just really think that you have to score a touchdown there after what we've seen all year this year, because I just cannot trust this kicking unit whatsoever. And we saw that in overtime. And I hate to be a results guy, but another very short kick that Cade York misses in overtime. Who's to say he doesn't miss that one in regulation? And why we saw him kick it on third down in overtime. Would you think they'd kick it on third down there at the goal line? I don't know. I think there's a lot of other things that could potentially go into play there. With the time on the clock, do you risk a muff snap with the hold errors we've seen so far this year? And then you're still giving them more time than the 15 if everything goes according to plan. So I don't know. I think touchdown, especially with the pieces we have on offense and the guy we have playing quarterback, is the way I'll lean more often than not.
Well, I think ultimately what it comes down to is a lot of people want the ball in Joe Burrow's hands to make the final assessment, right? So in that scenario, let's say you kneel it down and you've got 3rd and goal from the 3-yard line. You're putting the ball in Joe Burrow's hands anyway. You're not trying to punch it in from the 3-yard line, because you're in that scenario, it's not 4-down territory. And so that 3rd down play has to be in the end zone, and it has to be a passing play in that scenario, right? So essentially, to your point, you don't really want to have to get to the point where you have to kick a field goal. So you put the ball in your quarterback's hands, 3rd and goal from the 3. I trust Joe Burrow to make that play every day. And it sounds like the end touchdown that they scored in overtime was actually a play that they drew up in the 3rd quarter anyway. And they threw it in the dirt is what they're saying. So at that point, you had that play in your back pocket, a play that you drew up that you have faith in the 3rd quarter. You had that at your disposal. So if you had faith to run it on a goal-to-go situation in overtime, why wouldn't you have that same faith to run it on a goal-to-go situation in the 4th quarter? So kneel the ball down, make Denver burn their timeouts, and then go with that play that you trust and score that touchdown and win the game. Either way, I'm okay with the outcome, but I just felt like in that moment you have to be aware of the timeout situation, and that was my biggest issue, is that whether it happened right at the 2-minute warning or right after the 2-minute warning, Zach's got to know the scenario, and he's got to be forcing timeouts out of Denver at that point. And that was ultimately what led to the opportunity for Denver to score, is because they still had that timeout in their pocket.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And there's ways to go around it. And obviously he's been killed for his clock management in the days since the game. But luckily we have a win, and we can talk about other things, including playoff hopes, because believe it or not, with all the negativity around this team, there are playoff hopes. And a lot of those hopes are from some people's MVP. And I don't know if it's just me, but that conversation seems to be getting a lot louder about the Joe Burrow MVP. Troy Aikman on the Monday Night Football broadcast said if he had a vote, he would vote for Joe Burrow. So interesting as more people continue to talk and seem to kind of lean that way. We said it weeks ago, Craig, if the Bengals get in the dance, can he win that award?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about the playoff odds too, and I think you may have mentioned, but if you didn't, I mean, right now for the Bengals to make it to the playoffs, it's about plus 1,100 or something like that, I think, based on which book you look at and everything else. But if you did this and you have the screenshot that we can bring in,
for sure,
if you parlay everything that needs to happen in order for the Bengals to make the playoffs, it ends up being plus 1,500. And I don't know if you've looked lately, but the latest I saw was that Joe Burrow's MVP odds were plus 1,600.
okay.
So if I do some back of the napkin math, if the Bengals make the playoffs, it's got about the same odds as Joe Burrow winning the MVP. Is that coincidence? I don't know. What I do know is that there is zero chance this team is a playoff team without Joe Burrow on it. Right. And I think a lot of people are looking at this stretch that Joe Burrow is on to be able to try and get his team into the playoffs. And ultimately, this 10-game stretch, 9 or 10-game stretch that he's on, I think he's technically at 8 or 9 right now. By the time we're done this week, it'll be 10. I don't think you can look at that stretch of football that he's put together,
right,
that's literally unmatched in the history of the NFL, and say that he's not MVP worthy.
Yeah.
I'm not discounting the value that Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson have brought to their teams. I think they are both incredible players. I think they both have a ton of value to their team. You look at the tools that Josh Allen has around him, and he really doesn't have the receiving core that Joe Burrow has.
Right.
But I do know that James Cook leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns this year. I know that much. And I look at Lamar Jackson and I look at what he has around him, and I see Derrick Henry, one of the best rushers in the NFL, around him, who's also setting him up for a lot of success. So all of the MVP candidates that we're talking about all are very similar in terms of the fact that they have weapons around them. They bring value to their team, but we can all agree that all three of them, if they weren't on their teams, they would be very different.
Right.
The difference of the matter is that Joe Burrow has put together the best 10-game streak in potentially NFL history in order to get his team there after what was a very slow start.
Yeah.
And despite what everyone wants to say, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of weight on Joe Burrow's shoulders. And for me personally, I think taking that pressure and parlaying it into what can be a playoff run just pushes them over the top. And I think if they get in, I think there's enough momentum in the national media and elsewhere to make that push for him. And it's going to be a close race between all three of them, but
right,
it's going to be neck and neck. And that's crazy. If you would have come 10 weeks ago and said, hey, what do you think about Joe Burrow finishing top 3 in the MVP and it being, within points, I think all of us would have been pretty blown away that was a possibility. And yet here we are, that if things go our way, it's going to be really hard for voters not to vote for Joe Burrow.
We've done a good job on this show, and I think most people in this city have done a good job recognizing and realizing what we have in Joe Burrow and what exactly the season we're watching has been, even though the wins haven't quite been coming with it. It's been incredible, and it's been NFL record after NFL record, and Saturday against the Broncos might have been the best one. I mean, 39 of 49 for 412 yards and 3 touchdowns, getting sacked 7 times. I mean, this guy is just invincible. It doesn't matter what you throw at him. He's willing to fight through it, and he continues to make incredible plays and break records. I mean, 250 passing yards and 3 touchdowns for an NFL record, most games in a row. And it's just crazy. There's no one that's done what he's doing this season and not hoisted the MVP at the end of the year, which is crazy to put it in that context as well. And if he goes nuclear against the Steelers this week with 358 passing yards, he could get to 5,000, which, I mean, I don't say anything's impossible for Joe Burrow. He certainly could do that this weekend and get there, and then that would be, without a doubt, which it already is, but it would cement the greatest quarterbacking season in franchise history, without a doubt, and make it one of the best in NFL history. And if he can get to that point, then certainly it'd be a hard time not to give him that award. And I think it's interesting how the conversation has changed. Before the season, we saw a lot of Twitter doctors and people along those lines saying that Joe Burrow medically would never be back to the point that we've seen before then. And we even saw Chris Canty on ESPN after week 1, a lackluster performance against the Patriots, saying that Joe Burrow's done and he'll never be the version that we've seen again. We've seen some people hold on to those takes. The Shannon Sharps of the world are willing to die on that hill, but I just don't know how people can watch this guy play. And as Zach Taylor said, I'll throw a couple extra words in there, but as Zach Taylor said, he's one of the best players in the world, one of the best players in the league, and certainly in the conversation for the best of the best. And we're incredibly lucky, even if we're sitting at 8-8 and we need a lot of help to get in the playoffs. There's a lot of teams that would trade places with the Bengals right now for this quarterback for the future, and we have him, and it's a good place to be in, even though it might not feel like it's all sunshine and rainbows right now.
Yeah, I mean, with as bad as this offensive line has been throughout the year, imagine if Joe Burrow wasn't as good under pressure as he is.
Yeah.
Joe Burrow leads the league right now in QB rate under pressure. He's got a QBR of 104.7 when he's under pressure. That's a great QBR just with a clean pocket, let alone for someone who's under pressure. And when you're talking about most valuable player and you're talking about some of the things that we're talking about, if you're talking about a guy who has an offensive line who is clearly, at least on the interior with the guards, one of, if not the worst in the NFL, if you don't have Joe Burrow back there with his 104 passer rating, it obviously changes that outcome. And Joe Burrow has such a unique skill set that he's been able to bring this Bengals team all year long, that if you really look at everything and you continue to evaluate all of these pieces, I don't think there's any question that he becomes very clearly in the MVP race. And, you know, you look at the fact that Jamar Chase could ultimately be the Triple Crown winner. He's on pace for it right now. That doesn't happen without Joe Burrow. And I realize that Joe Burrow can't have the season he's having without Jamar Chase and without T. Higgins, but only 10 passers in the history of the NFL have thrown for 5,000 yards in a season. Joe needs 359 yards to do that on Saturday night, and he would become just the 10th ever to do it. I mean, those are numbers that don't happen by accident. Right. And Zach Taylor, when he called Joe Burrow in his postgame preference and said that I don't think anybody can stand on the field and watch Joe Burrow and say he's not the best player in the world, whether you're watching him on the field or you're looking at the stat lines or anything in between, Joe Burrow is definitely one of, if not the best player in the NFL today.
Yeah. And there's no way around it. And the fact that people keep trying to fight the fight, it's honestly mind-blowing, because he just time and time again goes out there and puts up record-breaking performances and does it week after week against any level of talent you've really been able to throw at him. I mean, the number one defense in the Chargers, he went and tore them up, and they really haven't been the same since. You saw him put up a great game against the Broncos. It's really been the story of the season. Outside of a couple outliers, he's been a stud week in and week out, and he's the only reason we're having the conversation we're having right now. And it's, can we do this? Can we do the playoff thing? And we just showed the parlay. I'll put it back up there. It's plus 1,500. 3 things have to happen. And of course, when we need them most, the Chiefs are the biggest underdogs they've been in a long time. Plus 350 on the money line, 9.5, 10-point favorites, or underdogs, I should say, depending on where you look. Just an absolute kick to the gut to see that spread open up, because I was holding out some hope that with 25 days off between Christmas and their first or second round game, it would be that the Chiefs would play their starters for at least part of that game, but that number tells me very clearly that they will not. So we're on the Carson Wentz and potentially Tyrod Taylor train, Craig. I'm not incredibly optimistic. I do think the Jets is a legitimate coin flip. I think that team can beat the Tyler Huntley-led Dolphins with relative ease, and with ease I mean me talking myself into them winning it. It's pretty easy to do. Chiefs-wise, I don't know, man. If Carson Wentz and Juju Smith-Schuster and Sky Moore are who I'm relying on to win that game, I don't know how good I'm going to feel. I don't think this Broncos team is very good. I think this Bengals team won a game where they played, relatively poorly. And the fact that they did, and the Broncos kind of are who we thought they were, leads me to believe that even a full list of backups or the Chiefs without a Mahomes or Kelsey or so could beat the Broncos. But a 10-point underdog plus 350 on the money line, that leads me to believe everyone is going to be out. And that's a tall task to ask practice squad, second and third string guys to beat a team that's playing for their playoff life. I mean, this isn't a Broncos team that's just trying to back into a certain seed or something else. They're playing for their playoff life and the rest of their season. So they're going to absolutely be giving it everything they have. And it's a real shame that it shakes out this way. You think about a blocked field goal earlier in the year against the Chiefs, the countless other calls and different things. Isaiah Likely's shoe being a quarter of a size too big on NFL opening night. So many different things that could have gone long-term, turns out, the Bengals' way, given the Chiefs one more loss and forced them to play starters in this game. However, they're 15-1, locked up the number 1 seed weeks ago, can't move, and they're 10-point dogs. Craig, it's a shame that they're the hardest part of it because it should be the easiest part of it. But here we are.
Yeah, and we had Kansas City fans in the chat during the game on Saturday coming in and telling us that they don't want to see the Bengals in the playoffs. And I realized that the Bengals would have to beat the Bills before we ever got to that point, but whether it's directly related or not, the Chiefs don't want to see the Bengals in the first round of the playoffs. And that's ultimately what it would be if the Bengals were able to beat the Bills. And I don't think they don't want to see that. And I know that the reseeding makes that different where they're playing the Bengals if the Bengals win versus somebody else if the Bills were to win. It's not like they play the Bills right away, but they certainly don't want to see the Bengals and would much rather face the Houston Texans or someone like that, I'm sure. So, you look up and down the roster, though, and the question becomes who can sit and who do they have enough depth with behind to feel comfortable with them sitting, right? I don't know the practice squad of the Chiefs, but Carson Wentz is the only other quarterback on the depth chart. So, unless they have someone else that they can elevate that I don't know about, Patrick Mahomes would be the backup if something were to happen with Carson Wentz. You look at the running back position, Isaiah Pacheco's been banged up all year, missed a lot of time with his broken leg. Kareem Hunt filled in admirably, but over the last several weeks, that running back position has been up in flux. They also have Samaje Perine there. The wide receiver position is interesting. I mean, you've got Xavier Worthy, DeAndre Hopkins, and Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown's been banged up this year, obviously just came back a couple of weeks ago. Do you really want to sit him again after he missed the first 14 weeks of the season and say, hey, we're going to rest you so you don't get hurt again? Is Xavier worthy of being sat in week 18? And even if he is Justin Watson and Juju Smith-Schuster good enough to fill that role? But, again, you look at the depth and Sky Moore's on the IR. Mecole Hardman's on the IR. Obviously, Rashee Rice is on the IR. So you're only left with 6 total healthy wide receivers, including
Justin
your
Ross,
3 starters.
Tyquan Thornton, and then tight end Robert Tonyan, all 3 on the Chiefs' current practice squad. So certainly could help a little bit in that range. They do have one more quarterback on their practice squad, Chris Aludicon, something along those lines. Apologies to Chris, but assume he'll be the backup to Carson Wentz. I don't think they'll risk Patrick Mahomes whatsoever. And then running back Keontae Ingram also on the practice squad. So with Pacheco and what he's been dealing with, would assume they're going to elevate all of those guys more or less. And
they've also got Carson Steele on the roster in kind of that flex fullback running back mode. Look, I don't know. Travis Kelce, they have some depth there with Noah Gray, Peyton Hendershot, and even Justin Watson is kind of a hybrid wide receiver tight end. Offensive line is going to be interesting too. Joe Thuney's been playing left tackle. They really, similar to the Bengals, they don't have a ton of depth on the O-line. I'm sure they have people on the practice squad that they could elevate, but you can only elevate so many people and activate so many people from the IR and everything. Wanya Morris is a guy that the Bengals saw earlier this year. Kingsley Suamatia is a guy that the Bengals performed so well against that he ended up getting benched and losing his job. But that'll be really interesting to see what this Chiefs offense can do against this really good Denver defense. And then, the Chiefs defense is good, and it's been kind of the carrying force for them all season long in terms of the success that they've seen. You don't carry a ton of depth on your defense a lot of times. So be interesting to see how they manage that. Karlaftis probably sits, but then you've got, some depth there. Tershawn Wharton's been performing well, but you've got Derek Nottie behind him. I mean, there's pieces there that they can be competitive. And again, if you can put some pressure on Bo Nix and see if you can get him uncomfortable, who knows what happens from there. So, similar to what I said about the Bengals when they played the Titans, if you put Will Levis in a tough position and you make him make some mistakes early on in the game, that has a very easy way to kind of snowball. And I think it's very similar this week with the Chiefs. If they can put Bo Nix in uncomfortable positions and get him turning the ball over, we've seen that Bo Nix has a tendency to kind of snowball sometimes. And if you look at his games, when he throws interceptions, he throws multiple interceptions a lot of the times. He threw 3 interceptions against the Indianapolis Colts. That ended up being a win for them, but 3 interceptions, 2 interceptions against the Cleveland Browns, 2 interceptions against the Steelers, 2 interceptions against the Seahawks. So if this Chiefs defense can get some pressure on him and get uncomfortable, force some defensive turnovers, then maybe it kind of snowballs and takes over. And if you can get some defensive touchdowns too, that doesn't hurt.
Hey, I know it's backups, not starters. Obviously, we'd love them having their starters out there, but these backups are going to be giving it 100%. These guys are playing for jobs and future contracts. It's not like the players on the field for the Chiefs are going to be packing it in. So we at least have a chance in that sense. The guys on the field aren't their best players, but they'll be giving it their best individual efforts for sure. And we'll be able to watch both those games at 4:25 on Sunday, Chiefs and Jets. Maybe a watch along for you guys. We'll see what we can do with all that. But before then, we have Thursday night, our final show at Champions Grill with an E on Work Road with an E. And the big man, the wrench himself, will be there. Craig Sandlin, the big dog's finally coming out of his cage, going to come hang out with the rest of us and impart his knowledge on those of you who are willing to come out to Champions Grill. We'll love to see you all there. Certainly glad that Craig will be able to make it out to one before the season's over. You've heard so much about it. I'm sure you're excited to join. That seat in the dark corner is really comfortable.
Yeah, the photos look like it's a really good setting for a show. No, I'm excited. I'm excited to meet a lot of Nutcutter Nation in person for the first time. Wasn't able to attend the Reds outings that were happening in the past. Haven't met a lot of these people in person, so this will be my first time meeting Jacob in person.
Yeah.
Excited to meet a lot of people and talk about some Bengals and Steelers as we head into this, essentially playoff matchup for both of these teams, and they both got a lot to play for, so it's going to be a fun game, no doubt.
Absolutely, and that's primetime Saturday night, Thursday at Champions, and then Saturday night at 8. I'll be here back from my hiatus to take you through another playoff game, and then Craig will join me afterwards for the post game, hopefully recapping a Bengals win and talking about how optimistic we are in Carson Wentz and Tyrod Taylor, because that will be that entire show. If the Bengals are able to get the win, we'll be trying to talk ourselves into Carson Wentz and the Chiefs backups. But until then, we'll be off the next 2 days. Well, I guess the next 2 days. I don't know how to do this for New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. But we'll see you guys on Thursday again at 10 for Off the Bench, and then Thursday night at Champions for Chatterbox Bengals. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you guys for the support all year long. It's New Year's Eve. It's the end of 2024, the first year of this iteration of Chatterbox Bengals, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure Craig agrees. I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Obviously not the season we've wanted, but I wouldn't be able to do it and talk about the team I love if it wasn't for you guys supporting. So thank you guys so much for always tuning in, no matter when it is, and supporting all of us, and it really does mean a lot.
Absolutely. Can't say it even better myself. Appreciate all of the support. Happy New Year to everybody. Who Day. Let's find a way in.
And I'll leave you with this on the way out. Plus 1508. I'm sure we'll all have it this weekend.